wonderful experience to be here together, and I think that all of us feel already the sense, the consciousness of the love about us. Since there are a number of us that are here at camp for the first time, however, I think it's still important that we deal with a few of the fundamentals about the camps, things that may seem to be old things to some of us that have been at the camps many years, and yet even there, we all have the need to keep these fundamentals in mind. I ran across a good story a little bit ago concerning the Grand Canyon. I don't think it was in this bulletin that I saw of the camp, but someone had been commenting upon how wonderful it was, and of course it is. I tell you, I just want to get out on this walk and look out over that vista every opportunity. When I go outside, instead of last night, I walked through the lodge. I decided that the Grand Canyon was a lot more interesting than that lodge, and so I've been walking out around the rim where you could look over and see it and so forth. And it's glorious. It's awe-inspiring. But evidently, this one person that was so inspired made some comment on it, and there was a farmer standing beside him. And he looked down and he said, "An awful place to lose a cow." Well, you see, he had cow eyes or something like that. He was just seeing what concerned his particular little habit of life and so forth, and so all the rest was lost upon him. And I expect, well, as a matter of fact, when we were riding down the other day, we were commenting on the fact that here just looked like ordinary country, and yet all of a sudden here this tremendous thing opens before you, and there was a little bit of fear that there might walk off in an unguarded moment, you see, and so forth. Well, of course, if you're not a rubber ball, I suppose that could be a little disastrous. But you see, it's wonderful if we're in a safe spot where we can look out at these things and have no fear, anything of the sort. Well, Glenn Clark used to say that one of the first steps in the camps was, first of all, to cast out all anger and fear. And he had a great gift for wanting to simplify everything. And so instead of going over all the different things about resentment and jealousy and covetousness and all that sort of thing, he tried to reduce it to just two things, fear and anger. Well, there used to be there's a great potential in that, because generally a fear is a response to some other element, you see, so that it covers, you might say, or it includes a multitude of sins, as the old saying goes. So it is a fact that all of us need to keep these things in mind. And I've been with some wonderful camp groups at times, and we've been in a wonderful spirit of prayer and so forth, and then some little thing would come in. I remember this happened in our group back in Chicago many years ago. Some little thing that came in, and what happened was all the ladies, I was going to say the old ladies, but they were older then to me than they are now, you see. They just rose up in fear, you see. And I remember one time when we were talking about some different people and praying for different people, and someone said, "Let's pray for William Randolph Hearst." And one of the finest ladies in the place, "Oh, not him." So you see, we all of us have these little things, you see, that trigger off things within us, you see, that are related to this anger and fear. And as a matter of fact, I guess that was one of the first things that Glenn Clark himself had to do, was to rid himself of the things that would provoke to anger and fear. Well, now, I don't know about you. Of course, Roland Brown and Marcia are dear friends of mine from way back, and so I've always been interested in the fact that Roland was afraid to ride in a plane. Well, I thank the Lord, had no fear about riding in a plane. I loved it. As a matter of fact, the first time I rode in a plane and the fellow was going to do a loop-the-loop, I just thought, well, I'm going to let go when we're up on the top and see what happens. Of course, I had a belt on, you understand. So I let go and fell up against this belt. So it was a little experiment all of my own. But I just say it because I was not afraid. But I used to be afraid of dogs. Well, Roland, when he started out on his first plane trip over to Hawaii, I think it was, the only reason he took a plane because that was the only way he could get there, you see. He said that he prayed, and so everything was fine. But then every time there was a little bump in the plane, all these fears would come flying up again, you see. So then he had to pray and pray some more until those were gone. And then there'd come another bump, you see. He said it was that way all the way across until they landed in Hawaii. But you see, this is the interesting thing. He said the next time he got on the plane, there was no fear, see. Now, he'd had to work all that time. You'd say, well, what's the matter? Why is this thing not happening, you see, the way it's supposed to? And because each time he'd pray it out, and then up would come this thing again. But you see, it did work, because in that process, he finally got these things weeded out. Maybe there was fear until he'd made one safe landing. I don't know. But at any rate, you see, it worked. But it took that time. Now, I can't tell you exactly how I got over the fear of dogs, but when I was a youngster, I was awfully afraid of dogs. I used to have a paper route, and, a paper route is a wonderful thing for a kid because it takes you into all kinds of places, and one place that I had to go into was an Italian, I don't know, he's a vegetable man or something of the sort, but I remember him because when you go and open the door, you'd be knocked over by garlic, so I used to, the smell of garlic, so I used to hold my breath while I stepped into that place and threw the paper where it belonged and then get out in a hurry. But he had 3 dogs, and one was a little fellow that wasn't so harmless, but he loved to bark. The others, they were these silent brutes, and they were much bigger, you see. So the little dog would bark, and then that would alert the big dogs, you see, and they'd come down there. And so the 3 of them got around me one time, one over here and one there, and one here, no place to run, see. And so I was just taking my bag and swinging it around like this to try and keep them away and so forth. Finally, the barking brought the attention of the owner, and so he came out and began to throw rocks at these dogs. Now, goodness, if that had been, if I'd had any answer to that, I'd have done something about it. The point is that I mentioned the fact that I got out safely, see. But I used to have that fear. Now, I don't know exactly when I overcame it, but I think it was when I realized that our fear is what evokes an attack. Because, it provokes the chemical reaction in which you send out an odor, and that odor just infuriates them, and so forth. And at any rate, it was when I got some kind of an idea of what love will do, and so forth. And I don't know how many of you know the story about that wonderful dog, Strongheart. How many of you do know about him? How many of you do not know about him? Well, I'll still get a chance to tell it, because but, you see, Strongheart had been trained over in Germany as a war dog, which was to attack anyone that, so forth. And so in being brought over to this country for the movies, he had to be retrained by this Larry somebody. So this Larry was wonderful, and he had gotten so that he could handle him all right and so forth. But he was taking him down the street one day, and he'd been in this training quite a while, and he knew the job was not done. And a little boy ran out of the door and began to run down toward the sidewalk. I guess was a little tot, maybe 3 or 4 years old, something like that. And this Strongheart saw this child, and he began to just dash for him, you see, for attack. And when he got within a few feet of this Larry Trimble, it seems to me it is, his heart was in his mouth because he didn't know what this dog was going to do. He might tear this youngster to pieces, because that had been his training. But this little child, with no fear whatever, just ran toward the dog with his arms outstretched, you see, and this dog stopped just about 2 feet from him, and this youngster threw his arms around the neck of this big dog, and the job was done. This this dog had finally broken through this old training and learned to respond in a way that is instinctive, is fundamental. Well, those things are thrilling, but it could never have been done if this youngster had no fear, and he loved the dogs. Well, the fear of dogs didn't leave me until I had learned something about this business of love, you see, and trusting them and so forth. And now I take great joy in the fact of approaching some otherwise ferocious dog with love. And it's wonderful. See, I'm still here. Well, now, what we have to do, we have to discover these areas, and we have to throw them out, because these are the things that block the flow and the entrance into the kingdom that we're talking about. And so I don't know what your fears may be or what your angers may be, but whatever they are, when those things come, why, surrender them. Turn to God. And many times we have to start with a small thing. Matter of fact, one of our team that's gone over to Liberia is Alex Smith. I don't think that many of you know him, but he was a teenager, or I guess he's along about 18 or so, when he went to a camp, and he'd been making a mess of his life, and he'd well, like so many youngsters that don't have any sense of direction, why, he'd gotten off in the wrong direction. His uncle happened to be Jim Elmore, who's one of our Koinonians, but a wonderful fellow. I don't know how many of you know these people, but I wish you did. But Alec needed a lot, and so he went to this camp, and he began to get this idea of what it was all about. But Alec loved to dress in the latest style and so forth and so on. And someone had just given him, or else he had bought, I don't know what, a shirt that he thought was the most beautiful shirt that he had ever possessed in his life. And he just loved that. But now he had begun to learn to try to talk with the Lord. And so in talking with the Lord said to him, Alec, are you willing to give away that shirt? And Alec wasn't. And so he struggled and argued and so forth and so on. And the only thought when he prayed came was, Alec, why don't you give this shirt to Chuck? I don't know how many of you know Chuck. You know, the one who plays the piano. Chuck Evans, yeah. Chuck Evans was at this camp. And Alex still didn't want to do this. But so finally he compromised with the Lord, you see. And he said, well, Lord, if it fits him. So he went up to Chuck and said, Chuck, why don't you try on this shirt? And Chuck, maybe Chuck had said something to him about the shirt. I don't know. At any rate, so he tried it on. It fit him perfectly. Couldn't have fit him any better, you see, and so forth. And so Alec, in a last gesture of surrender, you see, said, well, I want to give this to you. The point was, what happened? That opened the door so the Lord could possess Alec His life has been utterly different since that shirt disappeared, see? Now, it doesn't seem strange that such a silly, such a simple thing could have stood in the way, but you know how it is. You can take a penny. I don't know whether I have a penny or not, but I'll find out. I'd much rather it would be a penny. Anything more expensive would be extravagance, you see. But you can take a penny, and you can take this penny and you can hold it so close to your eye that you'll shut out everything else in the world. And that's oftentimes what happens with these little things. Now, I say this because these are characteristic of all of us. All of us. Now, some of us have learned some of these things, and life begins to get dull and gray, whereas we may have known the love and the beauty of the Lord and so forth, and yet we begin to get dull and gray, and we don't realize it, but someplace we have failed to clear away, to keep clean, to keep surrendered and released. Now, just not more than 2 weeks ago, someone told me about a plan to go and do something, and this meant that this would take this person away from my particular orbit of life, and I didn't realize how much I had come to depend upon this person. So it was hard for me to face the prospect of this person going out and some other place, you see. And so what did I have to? Well, I had to get back into the Lord and realize that my dependence is on no person. I have to depend upon the Lord. And I just mention this because these things are happening to all of us all the time. And this is one of the reasons that we need these tests, because we do not otherwise discover. Now, it's wonderful if we can stand up on the rim and look out at the beautiful canyon and enjoy the beauty of it and the wonder of it and all that sort of thing. But you get us down in the bottom someplace where we don't know quite what the way is up and out and so forth, you begin to feel a little differently. And there's where you have to learn to put our trust where it belongs. And so this is the reason that casting out such things as fear and anger. Now, with anger, Starr was the first one, I think, that taught me how to understand anger many times. Anger is a kind of a self-defense against things. That he said that anger was a tool, and that he found that when he was in the underworld and criminal life and so forth, that he'd be taken by the police and they'd begin to give him the third degree, that as long as he could throw enough hatred out against them, well, he could stand any pain that they could impose upon him. And one of the changes in his own heart came when one day he began to wonder whether he could continue to hate these people, whether he could summon up enough hate. Well, I think the first time I heard him say that, for the first time in my life, I began to understand one time when I had gotten violently angry about something. And then I could see that the reason for it was because I was protecting myself against the fact that I knew what I was going to do was going to hurt a very good friend of mine. And this was a protection of myself by throwing out this jet of anger. I was very thankful to Starr for what he revealed to me on that. So if you begin to get angry, what are you protecting yourself against? See? And are you willing to accept? As a matter of fact, I learned later on that most of the pain that comes to us in life comes through our resistance of things. Whereas if we surrender and say, well, all right, Lord, I'll take whatever you have to send, why, most of the pain disappears. It doesn't mean that all of it disappears always. Maybe we can't make that complete a surrender. But certainly a great deal of it disappears when we quit resisting the thing, when we accept what lies before us. That's one of the reasons that we need this constant testing in life. With our children now, with their families and so forth, and with 3 three youngsters there. One of the girls was holding her head the other day and saying she didn't know how long she could stand these three youngsters, you see, around there and so forth. And I tried to reassure her by saying, well, you know, married people with children always live the longest. And now that's a statistical fact, you see. And the reason it's true is because these children never let us settle down, you see. They don't let us get into our ruts, into the habits, you see. That's one of the awful things about living alone, is that then you arrange everything just to suit you very nicely and so forth, you see. And anyone that comes in and upsets that little thing, well, what's gone wrong with the world, see? And so these are some of the very simple things, but very fundamental things. Now, for example, I had an experience that one of the deepest spiritual experiences that I had was built around this type of thing, in which someone detected that there was something wrong with me. And now maybe they all detected, because as a matter of fact, one of the things that I think we need to realize is that there is nothing harder to see in all the world than to see ourselves. Our blindnesses concern ourselves. And anything that can help us to see ourselves as others see us, we should praise the Lord. We should thank God for it. Now, in this particular instance, this someone detected that there was something wrong with me. But did I know it? Why, no. I thought everything was wonderful, see. So he asked me, he said, Glenn Harding, what's wrong with you? Well, even just the question stirred up all sorts of things inside of me. It was as though you'd had a nice, peaceful pool of water, just clear, you see. You could look down and you could see all the mud at the bottom, but that's all. It was just the bottom, you see, nice, cool. But you take a rock and throw it in, or take a stick in there and stir it up, and what happens? Why, the first thing you know, all the water's full of mud, just all around every place. And so that was what happened when this person said to me, Glenn Harding, what's the matter with you? And I couldn't answer him. I said, well, I don't know, and so forth. Well, we sat down, and so then he began to ask me some questions. But because of what he had stirred up in me, why, I had enough sensitivity. I said, well, I don't question, but that all of these things could be helped, could be better, but I don't believe that any one of them is the real thing. And so he said, well, he asked me a very pertinent question. He said, well, if you knew, do you think you'd be willing to do anything about it? Now, that's a pretty good question. I talked to the psychiatrist one time, and he said, we psychiatrists, he said, what we can do is to help people see the door. He says that oftentimes, he said, the psychiatrist is like a man in a dark room that's saying, help, 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 let me get out. He says, well, we can go in the door and we can turn on the light and we can show him the door. But he said, if the person doesn't want to go out, there's nothing that we can do for him. And I've known lots of people that have gone to psychiatrists for a long time, and they've still stayed in that room. Now, they've learned a lot of things about the room, but they haven't left the room, you see. And so these are all things that get into this picture. And remember, the only reason I'm bringing these things up is because we're talking about getting into the kingdom, where these things do not abide, where these things cannot abide. And so this fellow, after asking me that question, I said, well, I think so. Then he asked me another question. He said, well, what do you really want? And this was a very strange experience. I trust that if any of you have ever heard me tell this before, that you'll just forget about it and listen to it like a new story. Because some of the old campers may have heard me mention this, because this, of course, was one of the outstanding spiritual experiences in my life. And so he said, what do you really want? Well, I'd had Ed Holmes ask me that one time years before, and I couldn't answer him. And if that's true of any of us, why, we better find out. Ed Holmes was one of the fellows at the first CFO. Wonderful fellow. He always represents faith to me because he just stood like a rock on faith. And he said to me, well, Glenn, what do you really want? And I couldn't answer him. And yet here I was, a grown person, and I should have been able to say. And I couldn't. But it started me thinking. At any rate, when this other fellow asked me the same question, this time it was just as though it was torn out of me. And I use that expression because it's revealing, you see. I wouldn't have said it normally. I said, I want Christ. Now, why did this have to be torn out of me? Well, I can't explain fully, except that I'm sure that it was because I had never reached the point of complete surrender. Oh, I loved Jesus, but I thought of him as a friend. I still had control of my life, and I thought that Jesus would help me. Jesus would always be good to me, so forth and so on. And but the idea of surrendering Glenn Harding, you see, that was something different. And so this had to be torn out of me because I knew Christ. Christ had to dwell within you, you see. Jesus, you could look at him from the outside. And but it was torn out of me. And he said, well, let's go down and pray about it. Well, I didn't even like that because I had grown up in a church where I wasn't accustomed to going down at a rail and kneeling, you see. And any of these things we're not accustomed to, we somehow don't like to do. They're a part of this stuff that has to be cast overboard. Someday, I hope with the rhythms, you'll get them to pick up all these things and throw them way down into the Grand Canyon. See if they can fill it up. Now that'd be a job, but we might go farther at it than we realize, you see. At any rate, so we went down to the altar. I was in it, you see. I couldn't escape now. And so we went down there and we began to pray. And now I don't want to give you all the detail about it, but at any rate, it was revealed to me after a while that there was only one thing that was wrong with Glenn Harding, and that was Glenn Harding. And it was an utterly devastating experience. Devastating experience. It was just as though someone was taking a scraper and scraping things out of my insides. Now, you know, when ships get barnacles on them, why, someone has to get out there and scrape them off. Well, this was on the inside, as though there was a scraping. It was the most disagreeable experience I think I've ever had, and so forth. But that was what was going on. And I was left, as I felt, utterly defeated. But then immediately, the Lord began to do things. Now, one of the things that was wrong with me was pride. I was ridiculously, and I emphasize that, ridiculously proud of a few little things that had happened in college, you know, so forth. It really almost makes me sick to think about it, you see, so forth. But I was proud of these things. And you know, a fella came down there. I think I'll have to tell you this because this is really, funny. A fella came down after a while, and he said, he tapped me on the shoulder. Oh, by the way, the first fella had gone off long before. He'd stayed there and prayed with me 5 or 10 minutes, and then he'd gone off, and I'd been there, I guess, a couple of hours on my knees, something like that, because sometimes these things take a long time. And so he came down and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, is there anything I can do for you? And I said, no, I'm afraid not, and so forth, because I was just licked, you see. And he said, well, wouldn't you like to come up to my apartment? And I said, oh, no, thanks, and so forth. I could still be polite, but that was all. And then he said, we're going to have a wedding in here after a little bit. And so then I felt as though And I felt as though the janitor had come in to sweep out all the dirt. See? Exactly the way I felt, see, and so forth. So I said, well, okay, and so we went up to his apartment, and we began to talk. He did most of the talking because I couldn't even talk. I could say yes and no, and that was about all, see. And what did I discover? I discovered that this fellow had been at the same university where I attended. He'd been a member of a rival fraternity. We had all sorts of mutual friends, and I certainly thought that everyone in that fraternity knew who Glenn Hardy was. And he'd never even heard of me. If he had, you see, what it would have done would have been to revive this dying root of pride, see? He didn't even know I'd ever existed, but here we had these mutual friends and all the rest of it and so forth. Oh, so thank the Lord for that, you see. And, well, then the talk went on about other things, and finally the first fellow bounced back into the room, and he had some sandwiches because I hadn't had anything to eat. This was gone in there in the morning, and this was along about the 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon now, and he brought in these sandwiches. Good food and good religion go together. Now, how many of you knew that, huh? Well, sometimes they do, but I refuse to accept that they always do. And because I like what Edward Carpenter says, remember that if, well, I can't remember the first part of it, but at any rate, he says, the divine outlook of poverty. If you have always had everything you want, so forth, the divine outlook of poverty cannot also be yours. Any of you know about the divine outlook of poverty? Well, if not, you find out about it sometime. That's wonderful. And but at any rate, he said, good food and good religion go together. And he says, where are you going to go now? And I said, well, I'm going to go down to the bus station, and I've got to get a bus to Happy Valley, New York. Now, you see, with the Kents, all these things, I saw a sign, Happy Valley something, on the way up here, but that wasn't New York. And it made me think of this thing again. I hadn't thought of it for years. But you see, that's the way with the Lord. He sets everything in the right way. So I was on my way to Happy Valley. I didn't realize it, though, see? And so he said, well, he said, when does your bus leave? And I said, well, I don't know. I haven't looked it up. He said, we'll look it. He said, we'll take you down there. And he said, I'm sure you'll find one leaving pretty soon. And so they drove me down there. And then when we got down there, they said, no, I think we'll just let you out here and go on our way. And so that's what happened. They let me out, and I thanked them and so forth. And I still wasn't able to say anything and so forth. And as soon as they disappeared around the corner, what happened to me? Why, I was utterly filled with the peace of God. I was in ecstasy because all of this inner thing had been cleaned out. And finally, the God of love that was around me all of the time was able to come in and dwell. And so in that consciousness, in that peace, in that, it didn't seem so much as love, but joy, I went in and I stood beside the information desk. And there were about 3 lines in front of me. And I just stood there waiting my turn. And after a while, the fellow behind the desk leaned over and he said, say, what do you want? And he pointed at me. And I said, well, I want to know when the next bus goes to Happy Valley, New York. And he said, well, say, there's one leaving right away. He ignored all these other people there, you see. There's one leaving right away, but he says, I'm afraid maybe it's all filled. He said, look, you see Sally over there? And I looked for Sally, and one of the ticket windows. She says, you go over and ask her if she'll sell you a ticket to Happy Valley, New York. And she said, and if she can't do it, you come back and see me. And he said, if there's anything I can do for you, I want to do it. He said, it does me good to see someone come in here that doesn't have a grouch on him. This is in New York City, you see, the bus depot, so forth. And so I went over to Sally, and Sally said, no, all the seats are sold. And so I went back, and he saw me coming. He said, what'd she say? And I said, why, she said they're all sold. And so I said, he said, will you come with me? And he left this whole crowd. He came out around behind, he took me by the arm, and he took me over to the driver, and he said, Jack, he said, have you got any place where you can put this fellow? Jack said, well, I got a seat right over the wheels. If he wants that, we never ordinarily don't sell. And he turned to me, he said, do you want it? I said, sure. And so he said, all right. He says, you go back to Sally and you tell her that Jack says she can sell you a ticket. See? Well, so I got on the bus, and since I was sitting over the wheels, who was I sitting beside? Well, a very nice, lovely young Negro woman. Because I suppose that the Negroes like to sit over the wheels. Is that so, Bernie? Is that it? Huh? They always choose that seat. So after a while, I felt the impulse to get to talking with her. And so we began conversation and so forth. And then I felt an impulse to ask her a very peculiar question. Now, here I was. Was I married then? Yes, I was married then. But I pushed it back a couple of times. Then I finally said, are you married? Now, why I should ask her if she was married, there's no rhyme or reason to it, you see. Are you married? And she said, well, and she began to stammer all over the place. Finally, she got out. She said, yes, I'm married, but I'm not living with my husband. In other words, my question went right to the heart of her need. It wasn't I wanting to ask that question. It was the fact that finally that the channel had been cleared, and so God could come in, and when he came in, then he tells you to do this, he tells you to do that. He even overflowed onto the information desk of the bus station, see? And so we had a talk then. We had an opportunity for sharing. And she got off about a half an hour later, and before she got off, she took me by the hand and she said, you'll never know what this half hour has meant to me. Well, I don't know. I can guess. I don't know. I've never seen her from that day to this. I don't know her name, anything of the sort, you see, but the Lord was there. Now, I've taken so much time to tell this thing, it's perhaps rather foolish to do that, but these things illustrate things. They illustrate truths, you see. And I had to get cleaned out, and yet, no, I hadn't been going to camps at that time. If I'd been going to camps, maybe I'd known more about it. I'd known Glenn Clark for a good many years, and he'd been of great help to me. But I had not, the camps hadn't been started at that time. This was, I guess, just about the time the camps were started. And so, but you see, I had learned that I had to be cleared out. And I have learned since that we have to keep cleared out. So these are fundamentals. And every time anything comes up along this line, why, we've got to get busy and clear it out again and anew. Otherwise, the joy of the Lord deserts us because we've shut it out. We're filled with darkness. Our eyes no longer single. We can't even see out of it, you see. And so these are some of the things that we need, first of all, probably to look at. Now, this, of course, is where the program of the camp helps us greatly, because it helps us to do some things that we've not been accustomed to do. And this is one reason that I urge everybody in the camp to participate fully in the program. I don't care how many camps you've been to. Glenn Clark, who started the whole thing, now sometimes he wasn't able to attend all the things in the camp, but always sometime during the camp he'd come out into the rhythms or he'd go into the creative writing classes and so forth and so on, because he recognized the validity, you see, of this pattern. And if you fellows get out there and BB has you swinging and doing a lot of, or maybe playing around like a butterfly and so forth, but you just go out there and play like a butterfly, see? Well, maybe Bernie ought to be the one to tell you, because he's going to fly, see? And I still want to see him fly out over this Grand Canyon here. So we'll see what he has to say. In other words, this is the athletes of the spirit. That was one of the themes right at the beginning of the camp. And what does an athlete do? He practices every day. And of course, I can't help but think of Paderewski at this point. I presume you all know about how he said that if he skipped practicing one day, why, he knew it. If he skipped practicing 2 days, his critics knew it. If he skipped practicing 3 days, the audience knew it, the congregation. And I don't know whether any of you have seen that movie of years ago about Paderewski. What was it called? But at any rate, in the dialogue in the movie, someone was asking him about the things, and he said, it's just occasionally that the miracle happens. The miracle happens. In other words, you can go out and you can perform at times, and maybe you say, oh, isn't that beautiful, and so forth, but the miracle hasn't happened. And the miracle, when that happens, is when we are in complete accord with this harmony, this composition, by which it expresses through us in every regard. And that, of course, is what we're after in our living, that the miracle can happen to where we live. Now, that's what happened to me out there after I'd been cleaned out in that way. I deserve no credit for it in any slightest degree, but the miracle happened, you see. And so when we get these things, and Paderewski indicated that he wasn't, even though he practiced every day, he couldn't be sure that the miracle would happen every day, because there might be this little thing that had thrown it out just a little bit. But when the miracle happened, oh, that was it. But it couldn't be done without the practicing. And so we have to practice every day. Now, I don't know what you practice on today, but you pick out something that where you haven't as yet yielded, or something that's a little bit hard to do, or something that maybe is a little bit distasteful for you. Now, what happened with St. Francis of Assisi? The miracle happened with St. Francis of Assisi. And what was the miracle? Why, the miracle was that St. Francis of Assisi, as a younger man, had drawn back with horror and distaste from any leper. And if any of you have been with lepers, you'll understand that. You'll understand the horrible stench. Someone just recently, Larry Hammond, told me that he met a man that the Lord told him to speak to, and he got close to this man, and there was such a horrible smell that he said, "Oh, Lord, not this," so forth. So he had to pray, and the Lord, and then he said, "You know that I just completely lost that there was no smell at all." Well, I remember one time that I met a man overseas, and people said, "You want to meet this man because he's from Chicago?" And so I thought, why, this is wonderful. Yes, Chicago being my hometown, I'd like to do this. And so I went to, with eagerness, to greet him. And when I got with him, he had an awful stench. Well, it was all I could do to continue to be pleasant and so forth, you see. Well, why should a stench stand between us and the love of God, or between us and any other human being, so forth? But it does again and again and again and again. And so whether you take some simple little thing like this, or something that you recognize as being great, like unforgiveness. We had a beautiful girl at Koinonia that after being there some time, and she was, when I say beautiful, she was beautiful spirit as well as other things. But she finally confessed. She said, I cannot forgive. I haven't been able to get rid of certain resentments. And so from that time on, our prayer was to reach that point. And thank the Lord it was reached. And when it was reached, why, what happened? The miracle happened, you see. The miracle happened. And it always will happen when we are released to him. So I don't know what it is that the Lord may want from you, but to practice is the road. That's the way. And what this means is that we take everything that ministers to life, love, forgiveness, giving. Now, we can say forgiveness, but let's just say giving. And I don't know how many of you know that passage from Gibran, from the prophet, in which he says, you say that you would give, but only to the deserving. Now, with how many of us is that true? I expect it's true with most of us. Yes, we want to give, but now is this person worthy of it? Does this person deserve it? What's he going to do with what I give him? And so forth and so on. And, well, you say, that's good common sense. Well, there again, one of Starr's stories is a classic. But the Starr story went briefly like this, that he was in a jungle, a hobo camp, I think down in Texas someplace, and so all of them down there took their turns in begging in order to have enough food and waiting for the opportunity for a real killing, I suppose you'd say. And so it came Starr's turn, and Starr never liked to beg. So he went into a store there that was a retail shoe store, but there were several floors above, all belonging to the same company. And so he went into this store, and I came forward to greet him very graciously and said, "What can I do for you?" And Starr said, "I want some money." Now, what would you do to someone that came up to you and said that way? "I want some money." Probably say, "The heck you do," or so forth. You see, we don't. Well, this fellow said, "Well, just let me take you upstairs." And well, Starr was a little suspicious at this. He thought maybe they were going to get a hold of him, but he finally went to the elevator, and they took him up the top floor, ushered him into the office of the president of the company. And so the president greeted him and said, "What can I do for you?" And Starr said again, "I want some money." And so the fellow said, "Well, now I'll be glad to give you some money, but," he said, "just one thing I want you to do before that." And Starr said, "I don't work for my money." And he said, "Well, he said, just a minute." He said, "All I want you to do is to listen to a story." So Starr said nothing but sat down. And so after the story, well, then what was the story? Well, the story was about how this fellow himself had been a successful man in the city. And then through drink and so forth, he finally ended up in the gutter. And then one morning when he had he was lying in the gutter, he'd been kicked out of the saloon even. And was lying in the gutter, he thought, well, all I can do is just end it all. So he began to stumble his way down to the river to jump in. And on the way down, he passed one of these jungle camps, and the fellow called out to him. And he got him to come over. This fellow began to take care of him. And this fellow was an umbrella mender. Is that right? Well, something like that. And, yeah, I think that's right. And so he finally said to this fellow, "You know, if you wanted to, I could teach you how to do this." And he said, "And I'd be willing to give you enough money to set yourself up in it." But he said, "I'm not going to do it unless you respect what you're doing." So this fellow finally agreed. And so he set him up, and he began to do this. And then, since he had a well-trained mind and education and so forth, he began to read up on these umbrellas. And he'd trade things. He'd give people a new one for an old one, but the old one might be sort of an heirloom or something like that. So after a while, he'd made enough money so that he was able to start in the shoe business. And then starting in the shoe business, he'd finally built it up into this factory. And he was back on top again, see. And he told Starr this story. And after that, he said, now, here, he said, you take this, and he gave him $25. And, and that $25 then, I expect, was about $100 now. At any rate, then he said to Starr, now, what are you going to do with this? And Starr, just as hard as ever, said, oh, I'll drink it up, and what I don't, or I'll eat it up, and what I don't eat, I'll drink up. And then the fellow looked at him and he said, well, that's what I want you to do with it. Because he said, I expect you don't have any satisfactions in life except eating and drinking and sleeping. Starr never forgot that. Well, Gibran said, you say that you would give, but only to the deserving. But the sheep in your pasture say not so, nor the trees in your orchard. They give that they may live. For to withhold is to perish. And so everything that ministers to life, we want to emphasize in the camp. Giving, sharing, loving, forgiving. Everything like this, and everything that militates against that, we want to cast it away. All of the old stuff, all the things that cause fear, cause anger, cause resentment, cause anything else, you see. Get rid of it. Good riddance to bad rubbish. And then cling to life. Move toward life. I shouldn't say cling to life. Move toward life. Open up to life. Let life possess us. And then we will have the key that opens the door to the kingdom. We'll be in the kingdom. We'll be living in the kingdom. And we'll have to stay in the kingdom. And that depends upon daily practice, daily elimination of the slightest thing that begins to come in, the slightest off-color thought, whatever it may be, this wonderful purity. I think it's the last thing that I want to say. You read the Beatitudes again, and I think you'll find that it catches every one of us. Now, some of those that were speaking to me last night, this beatitude, blessed are they who mourn. Well, why in the world should those who mourn be called blessed? Well, I've come to the conclusion that the reason is because every one of these beatitudes is a door by which we can enter the kingdom, where we get our blessing. And if you mourn and if you turn to God because of the mourning, then he enters in. And he possesses, and your joy and your comfort is greater than it ever has been before. The same way if you're hungering and thirsting for the right, whatever it may be, you see. It's a door. That hunger and thirst will get you there. Or the poor in spirit, well, there you're already got the key. If you're not, that's what we've been talking about, getting poor in spirit. That's what had to happen to me. I had to have Glenn Harding so knocked out of me that good riddance to bad rubbish, you see. And so with every one of these Beatitudes, it's a door to the kingdom of God. That's where our blessing comes from. It doesn't come until we get into that kingdom. But here's the door. So here we go for life, for love, for goodness, for kingdom living. But in order to do it, get rid of everything else. And then it's easy. Bless you, athletes.